All right, everyone. It is a day after a holiday weekend. Yeah, but nobody has that on their mind. Welcome to the MSP Initiative Live. We do this every Tuesday and Thursday, 1 o'clock Eastern time. I know today is a little bit busy because there's a lot of people talking right about this time, probably about the same topic. But today we bring on some special guests. Mr. Matt Lee, if you don't follow the beard, I think it has its own handle on all the social media platforms. So you get a search for that. Forget Matt Lee. You're looking for Matt Lee's beard.
Matt Lee's beard.
We bring back timely. Like, it's funny because I pushed these out over the weekend because literally they hit to the heart of this. And it's almost like we knew what was coming and pre-recorded it. Bring back Brad Gross to talk about crypto and ransom and legal extraordinaire stuff that, quite frankly, we all are going to spend a lot of time trying to get a hold of, somebody paying top dollar to just get answers. And Brad's going to help us maybe make sure that you don't waste your time and your energy and start a little bit further down the line. So, gentlemen, welcome. I appreciate both of you for coming online today. So, interestingly enough, we have another, I think they call this supply chain attack, right? Kind of. Sure. So, Matt, let's just start off. What's different about what happened over this weekend with the Kaseya situation that differs from the SolarWinds situation earlier in the year?
I mean, I'll say it like I said, December 19th or so, when we first went through the, SolarWinds conversation, and there's like a lot not known yet. But as the what's it the same? Well, the same things would be that we are already living in a world where we depend upon tools from third-party vendors. Those tools are being used en masse, have very little principle of least privilege and role-based capabilities in a lot of cases. And it puts us in a position where we're at the mercy of those vendors from are they doing the right things? Are they doing enough to reduce the bell curve of risk, right? Are they doing those things, or are they being transparent about it? And so, taking it a little far, but the differences I see so far, at least from the conjecture, and understand that there's going to be more that comes out, is that unlike SolarWinds, where threat actors gained access to SolarWinds, used that direct access to then create and manufacture their own access to the other systems through the supply chain, in this case, it would appear that some security researchers actually found, and I won't get into the details of all I know, but have found this back in April or so, and had already conjectured that there were these type of possibilities there. And it does seem that other threat actors have stumbled upon those chains of events that are necessary to elicit this. Now, as to how, were they insiders? Were they able to plant anything to create these? If you ask my gut, the answer is no. I don't know. I don't know what that comes out to. But in my gut, the challenge is that a lot of these vendors have monolithic applications that are rife with things that need to be rewritten from a technical debt perspective. And anybody that spends enough time digging into it will find vulnerabilities and find ways to leverage those. In this instance, that's a happy Belgian, but or Dutch maybe. But in this instance, the threat actors timed it. Looks like they did have access. Doesn't appear they got to the VSA cloud, and it would appear that the answers to that is that they had a web application firewall that was already preventing some of these things at the VSA level on the cloud side. Which indicates that they did know it. They were aware of the technical debt, and they were aware of cleaning up said technical debt and trying to fix it. The challenge is a lot of times these aren't just patches, right? A lot of these times this is like monolithic code problems that there's a rewrite needed, or right, there was a rewrite needed 5 years ago, or containerization and microservices. But I'll get off my pulpit here, but the conversation is right now, it's yet another supply chain. If in the definition of it was in my supply chain, right? Quote unquote, from my side, and that vulnerability was perhaps not managed in a good enough fashion, or perhaps there's a lot of variables in there that we didn't get to protect ourselves, right? I wasn't one of the victims, but
yeah, and listen, I mean, one of the things that's awesome about our sandbox, our community, is there are a lot of hands that went up from just, I could be George MSP in Philadelphia that said, hey, I'm okay. I have some bandwidth. If you need help, just let me know, and I'll do what we can do to help you. And if what we heard in the mainstream media is true, if 1 million endpoints were touched, I don't care what technology you're using. That's a lot of systems to touch and rebuild and reimage or whatever, right?
Yeah, or do nothing and pretend like nothing happened and move on. Nobody ever does that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can imagine that, for an industry that even from the smallest guy to the largest guy, one of the big things about technology land is like the imbalance from the work life, kind of balance. Everyone's like, all right, finally a holiday, we get a break. And that's when the bad guys literally said, oh, we're going to work. And
But
and
they're
then
not
everything
stupid.
else. Yeah.
Brad came off mute.
That's when you're most vulnerable, right?
Yeah, of course.
So Brad, we shared your earlier session last week, Brad, all over the internet. There was probably about 1,000 views in like a short period of time, which is great. Cause again, we actually talked about stuff that was very pertinent to what happened over the weekend. Right. But
yeah, sure.
How do you, when you go to your, like, let's say I was affected, right? I go to my customers. I'm like, I have some really bad news. Your systems were compromised. The next question they're going to ask is, well, how did that happen? I thought you were taking care of us. And it's like, well, it turns out that one of our upstream vendors actually was the source of the compromise. Right. Immediately, they're like, well, you brought that to the table. Now you're on the hook, right? Like, that's the first thing they're going to think about when it comes to who's responsible and who do I start suing, right?
Read your managed service agreement. I was kidding. Sorry, I was going to steal Brad.
First of all, no, but you're 100% right. And it's funny because if you have live video, right? Here's a little Dutch Shepherd behind me. And I don't think that she'll have anything to say on this topic, but maybe. You never know. It's,
wouldn't rule her out.
So you're right in that a lot of customers will turn to the MSP and say, you brought this party to the table, and so you're going to fix it, right? And this goes back to the topic that we have talked about over and over about what does your agreement say? Just like Matt said, well, what does your agreement say? Part of the process that this is going to make this, the process that it's going to force MSPs to think about is that their agreements not only have to touch on legal, like what we're responsible for and how we've allocated risk and so on, but reality and managing expectations. Because a lot of the customers, as you said, they're going to go to the MSP, say, you brought it to the table. And the answer is, well, so what? The same way that if there was a product defect in a Samsung TV, you wouldn't go to Best Buy and say, well, you brought it to the table, right? You brought the Samsung to me.
This battery that blew up in my pocket from Samsung was your fault, Best Buy. No, I was a purveyor of goods that were reasonably expected to be good goods, right?
100%. But the question is, that, right? And I know that. Do the customers know that? And the problem is they don't. And that is often the fault of, or almost always the fault of the MSP and the documents that they are conveying that don't, I should say, convey the fact that you're a reseller sometimes and that you're selling upstream provider services and that you don't control those services and things can happen. And when those things happen, the best you can do is maybe help facilitate a workaround if one exists. But other than that, you're going to be at the mercy of just like everyone else is of the situation.
So I think my takeaway from that, Brad, is that just like we've been saying, you have to have expectation management conversations. You have to help clients understand what you're doing.
Right.
And I think one of the challenges is that we're so quick to say, and clients are so quick to say, that's what I hire you for. That's what the smart boys and girls do. That's why you have your job. And in reality, it's our job to fight back and say, no, this is a team sport, right? Like I have to have you understanding what we're doing. And if I say to you, you know what, Mr. and Miss Client, if we move to Intune, I wouldn't have to use an RMM and I would have a little bit less surface area and it's your choice, but it would cost you extra a month. And we could go, oh, you don't want to do that? Great. Well, we had the conversation. And I'm not saying that's the answer. I'm just trying to give you an illustrative aspect of, if we have the conversation ahead of time. Now, when this happens and the client goes, but you didn't tell me. Yeah, we talked about this 6 times. As a matter of fact, you decided you didn't want to do that. I had to use this. And I'm being a little hyperbolous in the sense that often clients aren't involved in that.
This question, Matt, we said, does the waiver, what good is it? Like, does the waiver actually shield you? And
it sets the expectation.
Right. So it sets expectations. I mean, again, there's one thing to be shielded from liability. It's another thing, though, to go through the headache and heartache of having to call every customer and explain it. And then they're disgruntled and they're thinking, oh, you did something wrong when actually you did nothing wrong. And then, of course, the inevitable exodus from your company because you haven't explained things. So they're under the misinterpreted view of things.
Perception is reality, isn't it?
Perception is reality. And, it's all because there wasn't properly managed expectations. So, while we could explore and we should explore why this happened, how it happened, was there a deficiency or some bad act on the part of, any of the players involved. And I doubt there was. I mean, this is cyber criminals doing what they do, right? This is what it was. But, while we could,
but there's a reason buses stop at stop signs. There's a reason buses stop at stop signs. There's a reason buses stop at train tracks. And at the end of the day, there's never been any guiding force to these vendors to say, no, you can't take the new product you're trying to put out and put that 6 sprints ahead of the repair to the code base you need to do. And I think that is kind of one of those things where, is there any overt action? No. But we're in the middle of writing an open letter to all of these vendors to say, there's got to be some base standards, right? There's got to be things that you have to do and that I have to do, right? I have to be able to say to that client, here's my defensibility of why I chose this tool. Here's the others that we could have chosen that had their own challenges. Here's why it's all about defensibility to me, right? It's those 12 jurors suing me, not based on my MSA, but based on privacy laws, based on due care, based on those reasonable accepted standards that, is what I think the MSPs need to craft the story around, is how they've chosen those and what they're thought.
100%. But I'll tell you, I mean, right now, I agree with you. Everything you just said. I think that, there will be the natural questions from customers like, why am I going with a Kaseya solution? Well, why? Because Kaseya is top shelf stuff. And, the same thing happened. And I'm not lambasting any particular company. I'm service agnostic. But same thing happened to ConnectWise a while ago, right? ConnectWise is top shelf stuff. It happens. This just has to be explained to customers and say, things like this happen. We're going to facilitate workarounds and so on. But it's that management of expectation that's important. Really important.
So let me
ahead of time.
Let me ask this, right? So a lot of people signed or accepted their service agreement with the upstream vendor years ago, right? Could have been 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're going to turn around and go back and say, hey, we need to talk about this agreement that that was that we're already in for a while. But
Dude,
that's not an easy
don't get me started,
right? Go ahead, Matt.
Well, I've been in the practice of redlining my agreements with the different individual parties, all with varying degrees of success, right? Like if you read them, and Brad, you're the attorney, not me, but they're basically hold harmless agreements, even in gross negligence oftentimes, right? Like even if we do everything wrong, all you can do is sue me for the money you've put into the stack, right? And here's all the things. And I'll tell you, I agree with you, George, the vendors at play today, if I already had to make that choice, if I already had to be faceless, I'm doing everything to go to Microsoft. I'm doing everything to go to AWS. I'm doing everything to remove the need for an RMM. I'm sending a shot across the bow that says, why would I keep that surface area if I have no recourse to you? If your choices impact me in a way that I can never come back against you, right? If they're a publicly traded company, they do things like that. There's different paths there that don't exist today in these private equity held. Again, not an attorney, but the challenges I see is these agreements have been taking advantage of, whether you take that as a negative term or not, the immature client base that is the long tail of the MSP. I've got 12 clients, right? I have to take the agreement you're going to give me. I've got to use the tools. And those agreements are really, really one-sided. And I guess ours are too. So I get the understanding.
Before Brad jumps in, because he is an attorney, the Microsoft agreements are written in such a way where it's like, hey, our system can do what you want it to do if configured properly. And by the way, you're responsible for that configuration, right? So like, whether you like to say it or not, they're basically saying the same thing. They're like, yeah, we can be compliant. We can cover you for this, downstream end customer and this, this compliance.
I'll let Brad go. I'm gonna be quiet.
But you're still responsible for configuring it. Go ahead.
Well, I think that what you're touching on now is the age-old question of one-sided contracts. Oh my good, shock that all these vendors have one-sided contracts.
I can't believe this.
Oh my God, can you imagine? Who would have thought do such a
never.
thing? And the answer is everybody, by the way. And what amazes me is that the upstream providers, and they're all, you pick on Microsoft, you pick on any company, they're all do the same thing. What amazes me is that this has been the situation for a very long time, and MSPs are limited by what their upstream provider is offering, right, or not offering, and they don't convey that to their own customers. In their zeal to get a job done, to get the deal in the door, they make promises that they can't. They write checks that their company can't cash because they're offering all kinds of warranties and promises when the upstream providers aren't promising this stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
So, these are the times that the call goes out to review what you're being promised from your upstream provider. Review it, remember it, look, and then take a look at what you're offering downstream and saying, am I going too far? Am I offering more than I'm getting? That's where MSPs run into problems when they offer.
Are you saying
more
a risk analysis? A risk analysis based on data and a real actual truism of what we can deliver empirically? That's crazy, Brad. It's crazy.
No, it's nuts. Yeah, go figure. So self-audit like that.
Matt, you said you were in the process of getting a letter, out to the larger vendor community. What are the things, like, it's got to be two-sided though, right? Like MFA has been out for a long time on a lot of these platforms. And if you ask, hey, has everybody even turned it on? The percentage is a lot larger than you think as no. So what is the ask from the upstream vendor in this, as long as it's nothing proprietary, what is the standard that we're talking about here?
We're trying to figure that out. There's a group of people, including some of the CISOs that you know and love, that are all trying to chat. Like, what is the best standard, right? And here's the problem. If you look at this type of attack, this was a chained vulnerability attack, right? At least best we know, where someone said, hey, I now can bypass the auth layer and be an authenticated person. Now that I have that, I can do a SQL injection that allows me to do this. These are chained attacks, right? They called it sophisticated, but at the end of the day, I think the threat researcher in the Dutch researcher that found it spent 45 minutes total finding the auth vulnerability, right? The next chain pieces, those come later, but the 45 minutes, the guy's not even a big researcher. He's only been doing it 2 years. So ultimately, I think the challenge is, how do you codify? Don't be a douchebag. Like, how do you codify? Don't write shit code and leave it for 10 years and call it okay and never re-review it. And then you write your stupid SOC 2 statement that's so narrow. It has zero recompense on any of the actual actions that have anything to do with security. How do you codify that? Like, I don't know how to codify that. And so the challenge is really that. I think it really gets into certain standards, like saying, like to your point, enforce security bare minimums, right? Why does Microsoft even make me have to choose secure password versus not? If there was no choice, the customer would simply find the fields in which they had to fill it in and type it in. And so I think there's some degree of both sides, right? In the sense that vendor partners should be enforcing MFA, should be at least enforcing 2FA, right? So you have a TOTP type passcode. You can't do service without this. So I think there's a challenge there. The problem is none of us have ever thought about security. I don't mean that in a negative way, but in general, we've always been a fake it till you make it industry that kind of just comes in and we'll service this and we'll be more efficient and we'll be more efficient with our people. And that's how we make profit. And we're going to put in tools that make us more efficient. But there never was a conversation of, is this secure? Should this be used? Is there a way to secure this? And when I say that, I mean 10 years ago, right? But now as we have those conversations, my last 2 years, go ahead,
I don't
George,
even think people know how to ask the right questions, Matt. I
True
mean,
story.
like you're a specialist in this conversation because you've educated yourself and gone through the things, but like
hard knocks.
MSP doesn't have a CISO on staff. They don't even probably know what questions to ask to see if.
That's exactly what the vendors have taken advantage of. I'm not pointing at any one vendor. Even us, even as MSPs, we've all come in there and said, yeah, I got this. Do you really? Do I really have a full incident response plan? Not until 2019, right? Like for 7 years, I didn't. I mean, I'll tell them myself, I don't care. I'm saying the whole industry is broken across the entirety of it from a security perspective. And it doesn't stop with small to mid-sized business. Corporations, same conversation. You let shareholders and stakeholders make decisions. And every time when you go convenience first over security and you lean on the legal indemnifications and you lean on the insurance and you lean on those things, it's all fine and well till you get punched in the mouth. And then now you're like, why didn't we have a high availability? Why don't we have a second data set? Or, more importantly right now, some of the interesting legal ramifications are like, okay, now I'm an MSP and I come in and I turn off the server, but you had insurance and your insurance had its own incident response plan. Like, did I create an uninsurable event for you? I don't know, that's a Brad question probably, but no, the short story is I think the whole system has to rise its maturity level. That is why I stand on what I stand.
It's interesting a point you made earlier about how do you codify, all of this? How do you get a statute? How do you get a law that requires all this stuff? And the problem that we face in the legal industry is that you ask yourself, where does it end? Where does it end? Look, when you buy a new dishwasher, Okay. If you open up the lid on the dishwasher, there's usually a sticker in there. It says, don't stand on this. Well, what kind of idiot is going to stand on a dishwasher? Answer,
Somebody did.
a whole lot of idiots are going to stand on a dishwasher. So now we have to have stickers, right, on dishwashers that say, don't stand on this, right? Yeah. People swallowing Tide Pods. I'm not talking about kids getting into these things, horrible, tragic accidents. I'm talking about like adults who think it's funny to swallow that. Well, now we have to think about idiots that are swallowing laundry detergent. At what point, right, do we have to, should we say that we have to legislate against stupidity, or do we just simply pull back and say we can't codify everything, right?
True.
If there's 2FA, MFA, and it should be implemented, the answer is right. It should be. Well, do we codify for it? I don't know. Then do we also
trying
have to codify
to
for the next thing, right?
We're trying to from the president's office today, as far as all of the zero trust that's magically going to happen when nobody even knows what it means. But sure,
yeah. I mean, at some point, you're going to say to yourself, at this point, we're just sort of legislating against stupidity, and we're not going to do that anymore. So that's why you don't see it, right? That's why you don't see it.
But what I mean by that is, like, let's say company A wrote a database in 2015 for their users, right? And they added two-factor, and they kind of did that. But now somebody named Matt Lee, let's say at Iconic, says, that's not good enough. I need SAML. I need OIDC. I really need the ability to do group-based, role-based access and principal least privilege, so that when Brad working in my Dallas office gets compromised, 9 clients sue me, not 500, right? And so that the limited the damage. But a lot of this stuff is stuff where I come back to those vendors and like, yeah, we're going to do that this year. And I wait a whole year and I'm spending $1 million with them. That's why I'm in the call with them. If I spend $1 million or more with someone a year, I'm on very deep advisory, right? And so the challenge is that for a year, this particular vendor said they're going to do that. When we finally got down to brass tacks and I'm ready to pull all the business and move, because I'm now at a year and I have not seen any moving forward on those things, they're like, oh gosh, we had to do these 2 other products that came in ahead on the sprint cycle. And so we pushed that back, 2 more quarters, but we're going to get on it. And what that really means is they put future profitability ahead of the bullshit that they know they created to have right in my face and my death to come from it.
Yeah.
And the challenge is, how do you codify that? That's just, don't be a douchebag, right? Like, I don't know how else to say that. If you know of a giant risk, don't put other sprint cycles for new profitability in front of the sprint cycles to fix the risk that kills the others. And that's where they've made the choice to take an uneducated and kind of mature, I don't think it's a real word, but lack of maturity company. And just, if they didn't know, they'd never know. They just wouldn't know until it hits them. And that's what we just saw this weekend with Kaseya, is the same kind of technical debt coming to roost, in my opinion, Matt Lee's opinion. But anyways, I'll get off my soapbox, Brad. I get passionate sometimes.
Yeah, it's all good. So the question then arises now, right? I'm sure everybody who's paying attention, I would say a lot of people are now paying attention, because, like, if you turn on your news and they're talking about your industry, you probably should go and start seeing what's happening. I'm sure every MSP is now turning around saying, well, I should go back and look. And Brad's been saying forever since I've met Brad, and that's probably going back almost now to like 2010, 2011, first IT Nation I ran into a Brad. Hey, like, do I need to go back and reiterate to my end customer that I am not the software developer? I am not the Microsoft. I am not the data center hoster. I'm just bringing those technologies into the fray in order to help you get to your outcome, right? Like, how does that like Brad, even if it's already in your agreement, a lot of what you've been saying recently is need to manage expectation. Well, it sounds like that's the beginning part. You need to remind them that thing collecting dust in the filing cabinet says this, right?
Mm-hmm. The answer is yes. So you have to have a kind of special conversation with your client, right? That's first. And the idea here is that, it's never easy to broach a customer to remind them of how you've limited the relationship, right? They don't want, they're not going to feel like it's all, it's Christmas morning and all warm and fuzzy when you say, just to remind you, should this thing happen to you, you're not
covered.
Yeah, you're not really covered, and you're on your own. So there's no real great way to do that. I think that part of the ways that MSPs should think about doing things, okay, and this actually goes more towards a marketing thing, is that they should be sending out communications to their customers addressing issues of the day, like this one, right? And maybe through that, they can start to manage expectations. And, and there's a diplomatic way of saying, should this kind of thing happen to you, obviously we're not responsible for upstream vendors, or we can't control those upstream vendors, but here's what we can do for you. And, you could get them in the mindset so they're seeing these things, just managing expectations. There's no real great way to do it. I wish I could think of the right words out there, magic words, some sort of onomatopoeia or something that, you throw out there and they say, oh, it's beautiful, it's magical, it works. But no, I can't think of a good way to do it other than that.
I have a bit of a thought process, right? So has anybody ever been through a surgery or a major medical procedure or had a loved one that was? You'll notice that all the way up to that point, right? So from beforehand in the doctor's office to the bedside conversation before surgery, there's checklists. And those checklists are just simple things for that surgeon to say, hey, Brad, listen, if we do this, there's a 3% chance that you could die from this. We don't think it's major. We've thought through it. We're good. By the way, there's about a 30% chance that any one of the 4 vendors gets compromised on my RMM. I had to choose. I've done this due diligence. Here's why we've chosen this one. We just want you to understand that this is the risk. And if it happens, this is what would happen to you. Okay, check. And if you add that into a QBR process, you're starting to do things we're talking about being trusted fucking advisors, right? At the end of the day, sorry, George, if I got you demonetized, buddy. But at the end of the day, we have been seen as the janitor for too long. As MSPs, as people coming in, we're the plate spinners. We're here to keep things running. We're here to make Sally happy when her machine's down. That's what we're here for. No, we're here to help you understand the landscape of the risk in front of you. When you drive that dump truck on the DOT highway, you know what your risks are. You know what the insurance needs to be. You know what your choices are. You know what happens if the driver gets caught drunk. Like, you understand that as a business. You understand those things. We are supposed to be bringing that understanding, and we've never done that. We've never actually just gone through and said, Brad, do you understand this is a risk? Okay, this is what my MSA says the risk is. Is that okay? It's not? All right, well, let's talk about what we can do to reduce the risk. You should have MFA. You should have this. You should have this. We should use an EDO. I just think that we've been the plate spinners for too long, and it's our job to stand up and put on the white coat and stand there pre-surgery and talk with them and just check off the things that are part of their risk. And the better we show we've looked at them and thought about them, I have to imagine the defensibility of those choices gets easier. Right? I told you about it. We chose this one. Here's why we chose it. Here's their SOC report. Here's how we went through it. Here's our audit every year of these vendors. I have a much more defensible statement when I stand in front of 12 of my peers, if it ever happens. And so,
all right, let me throw a couple. Let me take a pause because we've had a couple things pop through the chats and stuff.
So some good ones.
Yeah, Darren says expectations are not. I think this will change perspectives as some companies rethink allowing RMM tools to be used once they understand that this is actually the culprit.
True.
So imagine the end user guys coming to you saying, nope, I won't allow your software on our system. That's going to make your job a lot harder, right?
And that's where the beginning of the sword is, though. I mean, the systems are often a hodgepodge of horrible decisions and old servers and things they didn't want to fix and things we didn't have the ability to convince them to. I mean, it doesn't just end there, but I agree with Darren in the sense that I think people will stand up and say, oh, RMM bad. We don't want that. Oh, yeah? Well, Server 2008 bad and Windows 7 bad. And right, like, as you get into those things, you're making just as bad choices. But I agree.
Brent comes in and says, how do you prevent people from doing dumb things? Do you have an answer? If yes, can I buy some stock?
I went in on some of the privileged shares of that stock for sure.
Wow, the White House putting stuff out. I was reading something as early as this morning saying that somebody either from the FBI or the White House are reaching out to victims, the US-based companies that were associated with this, and actually saying, hey, this was a criminal situation. This wasn't exactly, but like I'm not sure how much that makes you feel better about the fact that your 300 location grocery store is down, but okay.
Agreed. I mean, no disagreement here.
Yeah, great. Okay.
But if they had thought about the risk, here's the thing though, like, let's talk about it really, just empirically. I calculate risk. I then decide, do I insure that risk? Do I get rid of that risk? Do I mitigate that risk in some way? Do I find ways to limit the risk's impact? Right? It's all about quantification and numbers. I mean, at the end of the day, it's okay, my risk of a ransomware event would cause this. What can I do to help with that? Right? Even if that 500 stores was closed, if they had a failover backup plan, and I'm throwing a lot of conjecture, so punch me in the face, it's fine. And they had adequate insurance and adequate continuation of operations plans and adequate business continuity plans and adequate, because it obviously wasn't adequate if they shut down. And my point is I feel like so many people think this is some magical bullet that we're here to save. No, this is hard work. This is rolling up your sleeves and calculating and talking about risk and then talking about decisions. And that helps solve Brad's problem too, of how do you say it first to the client? How do you have a setting expectations? Well, because we went through the math and they said, no, I'll take this risk. I don't care about that risk. I don't believe in that risk. I'm willfully ignorant of that risk. Great. I had this and I showed it to you and I talked about it with you.
I'm going to take a slightly different business angle for a second. I'm going to take a slightly, okay. The grocery store chain, right? They know how much transactions per hour per location. By the way, it's a lot more than you think. I mean, they've done the math on for every day that we're not, pulling the cash register open. This is how much we're losing, right? On the other side, when you go back to the Colonial Pipeline situation, all these guys came out and said they could have run that pipeline manually. They could have flipped the switch turned the computer off, opened up those pipes, and let that black gold through the line. And the response from the C-level guys of the pipeline was, "You're right, we probably could have, but we don't even have anybody still working for us that knows how to do it without the computer."
Yeah.
Right. So there's this business conversation versus practicality. Do they even have the way to do it without the computer?
I'll let Brad go because I cut him off a bunch, but that one got me triggered.
Oh, no. Well, first of all, it's funny, George, what you're basically saying is that we don't need all this technology. We could just actually flip the switch ourselves. So yeah, it's always amazing to me. I think that, Matt, what you were saying earlier about having clients accept a certain level of risk and allocating what level of risk they're willing to live with, right? There's a great line from, I think it was Boardwalk Empire, where he says, we all have to decide the amount of sin we can live with, right? Well, we all have to decide the amount of risk that we can live with. And I agree with you 100%, but I think that the issue that MSPs face is that they're not explaining that risk to their clients, right? So, hey, see, I got the thumbs up.
Yeah,
so
100%.
You understand the risk. I understand the risk. George understands the risk. Yeah, but we're not the ones that you have to explain it to, because we're the ones that sit back when something like this happens and say, oh, okay, it happens. I mean, it happens from time to time. It's the customers didn't understand it at all. So the question is, what are MSPs doing to explain the risk? What are they doing? What kind of communications are they having? Are they having constant touch points? Are they sticky with their customers? I mean, do they have a lot of communication, or is it pretty much a hands off unless something goes wrong? And I think if it's a hands off, if something goes wrong, well, then when things like this happen, here we are. They don't understand. They just don't get it. And I understand why the customers don't understand. So MSPs have to do, I think, a better job of explaining things.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the challenge is then there's also the question of how much does the average MSP understand in the same vein. And I don't mean that diminutively. I just mean there is no barrier of entry for our world, right? There's nothing that says I know what I'm talking about. Nothing. Other than the certs I've passed since then, no barrier to get in and say, I'm going to help save your world. My hairdresser has a license and all she can do is cut off a little bit of hair. It's got to come back, right? In reality, I'll look stupid for a while. But we can go and destroy people's entire empires, right? They've spent their whole life building this 50-employee company that generates them 300 grand net profit every year, and they're living a very happy, comfortable life. And if we had told them, hey, listen, you need to spend about another $3 grand a month to even close 60% of these risks, right? Just even get started. Let's do these things. If we don't adequately sell that to them, they don't do it. And then when it hits, it still didn't stop the end of their business, right? I think that's kind of the conversation. And I think we have to get better at explaining. I think we have to get better at telling it in the storytelling methods, because I don't think it's reasonable to try to say, I'm going to educate an MSP to be able to educate a client about what multi-factor types are and type 1, type 2, type 3, and how type 2. I'm trying to do that to raise the tide, but ultimately my doctor doesn't explain how peptides bind to other peptides when they're trying to decide whether or not this is the appropriate treatment either. And I think they get a good job in the doctor space of two things. We believe in our overall death. As humans, we believe we will die. Right? You could maybe argue at 17 to about 20. I probably didn't believe that. But, the point is that as humans, we do. And so we go to the doctor. We're already in a point of fear. We're already believing that there is something wrong. We're already believing this could be that thing. And then when they have answers, we already trust them. They've been through licensure. They're set in a trusted facility. But doctors really have it pretty bad, right? Doctors actually have thousands and thousands of diseases and conditions to know about. Doctors, wait, that's our world too, right? We have such practitioner space where it's changing every day. There's new problems and challenges, weaknesses. So Yeah, I think back to that point that somebody just made from Facebook is that MSPs themselves don't understand the risk, and so they can't articulate it appropriately.
Yeah. So the other part of Marvin B, by the way, Mr. Podcast Extraordinaire. Thanks for watching.
Nice.
Maybe we should have you on. We'll simulcast.
For sure.
What happens with the somebody will do it cheaper theory, right? We always talk about the bottom end of the MSP spectrum is always in flux, right? Internal IT loses their job, they start an MSP. MSP gets burned out to go work at internal IT. And this is like this 20% cycle that keeps on going in and out. This whole do it cheaper thing, that's not unrealistic, right? That's something that does happen all the time. I know that we've always said, hey, it's not about the money, right? I'm not going to be the most expensive. I'm not going to be the least expensive, but I want to do it right. But sometimes people are price shopping to spend the bare minimum. I mean, lawyers is a great, not saying that it's Brad, because Brad's a smart guy. Came from the technology world, but lawyers and, accountants and doctors and dentists. And like, I could go on and on. These guys are sometimes the worst offenders. They're like, nope, I don't want to spend that. I'll just, I'll write it on. I'll keep on writing that script on a piece of paper. I'm good. I don't need the.
Yeah, I can tell you, especially physicians and dentists. Oh, amazing.
The worst.
Amazing. They're the worst at this stuff.
It was even worse being their banker. That was rough.
But yeah, I think that, Marvin's 100% right that MSPs don't understand the risk themselves, right? Like Matt said, there's no activation point that you have to hit to get into this industry. You could start at the bottom and just call yourself an MSP. What makes you an MSP? Very often because you've called yourself an MSP. That's what makes you an MSP. And whether there should be legislation or some sort of regulation to control that, that's an open question, right? That's an open question. But as far as sidestepping the other part of what Marvin said, sidestepping the risk to get the business because someone will do it cheaper, happens all the time. I see it all the time. I mean, I review statements of work. I probably review 5 to 7 statements of work a day, every day. So nice. Think about at the end of the month, I've reviewed a couple of hundred, if the math is there. And I'll see it all the time that they'll start sidestepping things, keeping things out. Well, why? Well, they could get it a couple bucks cheaper. So I don't want to say too much. I don't want to, it leads to such a bad place, But
in accounting, you have GAAP, right? You have some barrier of standard. In law, you have the bar. In medical, you have AMA. You can have people saying, I'll do that tonsillectomy cheaper. Right. But at the end of the day, they know what a tonsillectomy is. It's defined. It's a set procedure. Right. It has a code. That's the challenge, I think, too, that we have is that there's nothing to make apples to apples comparisons across the board. Right. I mean, NIST goes a long way in how you drive, towards NIST standards. You could compare against those standards and things like that. Right. But, ultimately, we don't have some of those metrics. And I think you could do it with even a Hippocratic Oath type thing. I mean, even if you did it in such all right, here's what you have to know to be in this industry, but here's your overarching theme, right? Because we can't fix stupid, but we can say, here's your overarching theme of what you're supposed to be doing.
I hear you. I don't have as much faith in those oath things. I mean,
I don't either, but it sounds
the Hippocratic Oath and then watch the plastic surgery that you see on TV, and you think, well, somebody agreed to do that surgery, right?
True. Remember John Q? It was like Hippocratic Oath? No, more like hypocritical oath.
Exactly. But the question of legislating this type of thing to avoid these types of issues, it's an open question, and I think that as MSPs become more ubiquitous and we rely on them more and more, I think that you're going to start seeing a patchwork of laws throughout the U.S. aimed at exactly.
Oh, God bless us all.
Well, the problem is a patchwork of laws is just that. It's a patchwork. So depending on what state you're in or where the customer is, you might have different laws applying. There isn't a federal standard coming anytime, anywhere soon. So I think until then, you need to just educate your customers. That's the key.
So Darren comes in earlier and he says, "Yep, allocation of funds between marketing and software development. This will be very interesting, particularly in this specific case."
Back to my conversation about about technical debt and investing in the next sprint for the next product cycle, right? Yeah, I think that's when that came in. But
no, I mean there has been. So, I mean, listen, Darren will tell you if I were to bring him on, he'd say he's not necessarily a Kaseya fan. I put those in quote. but a lot of people have come out and said that, hey, they've been super straightforward. They put it out there. Somebody even said that they were going to try and, put money out for anybody who, at the MSP level who, I think Fred, the CEO of Kaseya came out, like, they shouldn't be responsible. They can't afford it. We want to help them out. I mean, I don't know how far that goes, but
Sure.
I mean, it sounds like they're trying to limit the bleeding, if you would.
From a shareholder perspective.
Well, I mean, they could have also just gone out and paid the $70 million ransom. I'm not sure the White House and the FBI would have enjoyed that, but in all the other previous scenarios when the pipeline people paid money or whatever, right? They said they were going to write that off. They were just going to claim it as a business expense. Yeah. So, but $70 million is not a small number.
No, it isn't.
No, I think they're trying to go ahead, Brad, if you want to.
No, I was going to say, and I've seen, to their credit, and maybe they are watching how other companies have handled it or haven't handled it in the past. But to Kaseya's credit, they seem to be stepping up from an information perspective, and maybe people have different opinions. I was watching a podcast earlier today with one of their VPs explaining, what they know, what they don't know, what they're doing, and so on. And it takes a certain amount of humility for a company to turn around and say, yeah, this happened, and here's what we're going to do. And we don't have all the answers yet, but we're looking into it. And I think that, again, not endorsing anybody in particular, I think they've done a pretty good job from a PR perspective over the past few days.
Even a response perspective. I'm very, very happy with this. So after, not this, okay, so don't put me on recording saying that, but I'm very, very happy that ever since the SolarWinds kind of FireEye start to this, right? When FireEye came out and said, I think SolarWinds was the reason that we had this problem, SolarWinds Orion. That was days before the Orion announcement. But ever since then, Microsoft came out and said, we had source code stolen. Microsoft, literally one of the first companies in history to say, hey, yeah, out of doubt, no doubt, they stole our source code. Just want to let you know. And so what I'm getting at is we've started terming that in our industry the Microsoft doctrine of this just hyper sharing, hyper truthful about it as much as possible, hyper let's put it all out there and let's see what happens. And what's really great is you've seen several companies since this kind of first shot by Microsoft in early February, January, into now other companies starting to say, hey, I was breached. I had my source code was taken, or I had this, or this was. And in Kaseya's case, I have strong suspicions they've known about it since April. I have strong suspicions they put in what they could to protect against those vulnerabilities in kind of a patchwork way on the front end of their VSA cloud. From what I understand, nobody in VSA Cloud was hit. And what Kaseya did when they started seeing the enumeration was an action. They shut it down. They took the point to say, I don't care what press comes. I don't care how this goes. We know this isn't affecting our WAF protected front end of the VSA Cloud. We know this is only affecting on-prem people. And we also know we had a Sophie's Choice where we couldn't just go tell on-prem people because bad guys would then enumerate. If you guys remember after the SolarWinds attack, when proxy logon happened, within 5 minutes of announcement, people were enumerating proxy logon within 5 minutes, right? It's ridiculous. And so the point is Kaseya might have had this nugget of knowledge and have been trying to work on fixing those patchwork inside their systems. They knew they had protected their VSA cloud. But even that saying, when this started enumerating and somebody said, hey, they chained these together, this is what we're seeing, there was ransomware delivered, they shut down VSA cloud very quickly. And I'm not a Kaseya fan. Like, I'll just say that out loud. I have never been. But I will say that I do stand behind their actions so far this last, couple 4 days. I do believe they've acted with humility. I think they've acted quickly with information. They've shared with other partners. They worked with Kyle Hanselman very quickly to try to help give whatever data they could. This has been a great example of community coming together. One question I have for you, Brad, around that is, let's say I, as an MSP, am about to go and help with the recovery efforts for another MSP, right? I probably don't have a legal agreement in place with them. They have their risk with their client, but what about the risk I create in that incident, right? What about the risk that I create as I step in to help another MSP with whatever legal agreement? Have I bought into some of their risk as a helper?
It's interesting because, by the way, great move there, George. That move there, I like. That should be like a meme of some sort where you just do that. They teach you in law school. They say when you touch a document, you own it. Right? When you touch something, you own it. Somebody comes into my office and says, could you look at this will, trust, and estate thing I did? I'm not a wills guy, right? I'm not a wills guy. But the point is, if I say, oh, yeah, I'll take a look at it, and I look at it and I say, yeah, it looks okay. and something goes wrong, you know they're pointing the finger at me at some point, right? Because I touched the document, I did something, I got involved. So when another MSP is getting involved with, when two MSPs are getting involved with each other, one is coming to the rescue of the other, which I encourage. It's perfectly great. And you're right. We have seen that happen over the past few days, community coming together, competitors coming together, all good stuff, really is. But at the same time, there should be an understanding between them. And it doesn't have to be a lengthy, 12-page agreement and so on, but there should be an understanding of what the boundaries are, what they're going to be doing, and that, who's going to indemnify the other person should something happen. Should the customer turn around and say, oh, now you're involved, I'm going after you too.
100%.
There's no good Samaritan law when it comes to the MSP world. So I think that they would be well advised to have a very quick a document that lays out what they're going to do, what they're not going to do, when they're going to back away, and who's going to take ultimate and primary responsibility.
And it should be the person that's being helped, right? I mean, at that point, so the indemnification clause should be directly one direction.
Right. Yeah. Maybe one day there'll be a good Samaritan law. There isn't yet. So.
Yeah. So a couple other comments that popped up. So Josh Lieberman, our favorite friend from Mexico, says this is their Kobayashi Maru Star Trek.
Maru.
Well, unfortunately, the question is, can you rig the game to win? I don't know. I guess that's the question, right? Because that's how he won in the end, Captain Kirk. But thanks for that, Josh. And then Brent comes back and says, back to the whole, hey, I'm competing right for business, and I'm in a very competitive landscape. Money is going to ultimately make the decision. He says, but when you're that honest about the situation, right, the industry, the risk, and the person bidding against you, your competitor, says nothing, right? They don't even reference it. Are you the one that ultimately will get that job in the end versus the other guy?
I think so.
I guess the question is, what business is good business? I think that's the counter question, right?
Yeah, but even taking that a step further, right? If Brad comes in and says, hey, Matt, listen, I looked at your agreement. I've got this. I know you need to do this. This is a challenge. Let's fix that. And you do this. And hey, this one's going to hang you, bro. And then I have Brad's competitor come in and he goes, hey, listen, it's these three things and you're good. I would hire Brad because I feel like I'm hiring a professional that has the data and can show it to me in more granularity. Whether they choose to or not all the time is a different story. But I would say that's for the good business, right? I think if you took it for the type of client you're wanting that's going to listen to the suggestions, that wants to be involved in the risk conversation, that has, I think you made a good point, is that if that client goes, no, I don't want that guy Brad because he told me all these scary things, that's willful ignorance, or you don't trust Brad, right? And so I think either one of those needs to be solved or doesn't. And Brad goes, man, I dodged a bullet with that Mac guy. He wasn't going to listen to me anyway. He doesn't trust me on the three things that he said because this other guy told him it was fine. It's more nuanced than that, I think. But I really would say I think you get the business if it was destined to be. And if you spent your time only taking the clients that would listen, that were willing to be at the table, that pulled up and said, I want to talk about these things. Yeah, they're scary. I just want to learn. Let's see what's the best. If you had a whole book of those clients, you would have a much closer, that's not a real word, much more closed risk surface, right? You would have a much smaller enumerable surface because you remove those bell curve stupid things. Like, why would anybody have no 2FA? Why would anybody keep the shitty copier that they have in their office because it doesn't support TLS and they're on a contract? Don't want to replace it. Don't want to pay more. Great. You chose a risk. I have something to do for that risk, but you chose it because you don't want to pay $12 more a month and extend your lease 2 years on your copier. I get it. But just understand here's your risk.
So you're saying walk away from those clients. Is that what you're saying?
I'd love it. That'd be perfect.
But it's not real. It's not realistic. Brad says they never do.
Yeah, that's the problem. In a perfect world, they would. But, the problem, and Marvin hit this earlier, Marvin B., when he said, MSPs will sidestep because they're going to get it somewhere else cheaper, right? Or something like that. So, yeah, that's, it's an education that's missing. It's an education on the part of the MSPs. It's an education 100%. On the part of customers. And I don't know when that's coming. We try to change it through agreements that manage expectations and teach. They provide teaching moments, explaining that I'm not a vendor. I am a reseller from a vendor, and as such, I facilitate certain services, but I don't provide them myself, and so on. So those are teaching moments, but it's not industry wide yet, unfortunately.
Agreed.
Brent comes in and says, in a perfect world, they do walk away. If there's no new business coming in, that's when they panic and bend to whatever the customer wants. Money does say, I mean, I hate to say it makes the world go round, but it does. And
but we went through that process. I mean, I'm not saying that doesn't happen. You're 100% right. When we were in bad needs, we'd take anything that write a check that made profit, right? Like that was the reality of it. But as we started going through and understanding risk, and as we started growing in years 3, 4, 5, and 6, I guess, we started pumpkin planning those out. Like we just started saying, no, I'm going to charge you 3 times as much as you make. Why? Because we did an overall cost comparison and risk comparison and said, you're too risky for us and too costly. And here's the new number. Here's what I'm going to put in when I spend that number. So yeah, I think that you can say you're right. You've got to get the doors open, but it doesn't stop you from actually showing that you're taking iterative ways to try to harden that and reduce the bad clients.
So I want to take the last 10 minutes here and just talk through a couple of thoughts that have popped in my head actually through this call. One, okay, we talked, and I know Brad and I have definitely talked, and Matt, maybe we've brushed in our last call from a while back, but hey, the insurance company and what's covered in their incident response plan. Have you actually called the insurance company and said, can I get a copy of what that plan is so that I know what I'm walking into if and when?
Yeah.
I don't know. Have you? What does it say? I want to know.
Well, they're all different. They're all, I mean, like Brad probably knows this as well, but most of these companies, insurance companies, have tried to profitize or limit cost on some of these incidents, right? So they've partnered with 3 main companies. This is what they do. And they've done it in a way that said, okay, an IR is going to cost me 12 grand instead of 26,000 because I partnered with this one. I do all of them with them. And so, yeah, but each of them are different, right? And if you really wanted to get on the topic of insurance, nobody's insurable. There's no classes of insurance. There's no actuarial data to separate risk pools. Nope. All of it's bullshit. It's all lies and check boxes on pages. So the insurance companies themselves are just reeling from that loss over the last 3 years. And they're seeing how the reinsurance rates, like in Great Britain, the reinsurance rates on cyber insurance went up by 40% in 1 month. Like, guys, holy Jesus, right? Like it puts all risk in that insurance hand. You've got travelers coming out saying we're not going to honor anything without 2FA. Where do they draw the line on that? Does that mean if George gets compromised and he's the one risk and he didn't have MFA? Or does that mean you find a copier account that was in that tenant that wasn't even part of the subject problem, but because they said if there's no MFA on all things, we're not paying the insurance claim? I don't think it's an insurance game anymore. But I will say for the people that have policies, you can go and say, I want to know who your IR team is. I want to know who you're going to choose. Well, we have 3. Great. I'll pick one of them now, and I'll at least understand what the enumerations are. And I would even say, in my opinion, when I believed in insurance getting through some of these actuarial problems, that I would have said, pick 1 or 2 insurance companies, not for profit, not for you to have profit, but so you can control what your outcome is going to be and say to the client, hey, you're going to be down 3 days. Why? Well, if you don't have redundant hardware, this insurance company requires us to come in and gather forensics. And if we don't gather forensics, they won't pay it. And this is what they do for forensics. And they're usually 3 to 5 days delayed on getting that. Oh, God, that's horrible. I can't be down 5 days. Great. You probably should have a stupid dado or some high availability failover or something that gives you the ability to function while that piece of shit sits over there and is compromised. Like, if we're not having that conversation, we've failed. We've already failed as an MSP. So this problem is really wide. But yeah, insurance is a big topic. That's its own call.
Brad mentioned in his last call that, the MSP should actually already have an incident response plan internally or ultimately for their customer, right?
100%.
Brad,
I love this Brad guy.
Brad, where do people even start? Do they do the same thing when they have to go make an agreement? They say, hey, can somebody send me a copy of, or let me go to LegalZoom and see if they got a template I can use? Like, where did they even, like, I would say the majority of people, if I count on my hands, like 9 out of 10 don't have this, right?
True story.
Where do they?
Where do people find a good source of these kind of documents that would help them protect them from legal liability? Where could they find a lawyer?
I don't know. And in Brad, something.
I'll send you a referral, maybe. No, what they want to do, so you're 100% right. We talked about this in the past, that incident response plans are not just for breakfast anymore, right? They're for a lot of different things, including the type of thing that we're talking about with the Kaseya breach. I think that you got to start at the beginning. First, you have to recognize you need the issue, right? You need the document, and they do. Then once the recognition is there, it's not just simply, okay, if an incident occurs, we're going to all get together and we'll figure out what to do. Something simple. you really have to think about the fact that when an incident occurs, there's going to be anger, there's going to be jealousy, there's going to be politics, there's going to be nervousness, there's going to be all kinds of things, right? People are pointing fingers at each other. You're not going to know what to do as far as PR is concerned. You're not going to know what laws. Is there a data breach law that you need to know about, right? Is there something? So the idea is you want to plan all this in advance. You want to sit down, have an incident security plan in place so that when something like this happens, there's no guesswork.
Right.
It's all kind of by rote, and as far as, how you go about doing that, you contact me or anybody, who practices in this area. This is what you do.
And even if you find it to be wrong, let's say you write your best efforts of an incident response plan, you've got comms guidelines in there, you have people understanding what their roles are, and you do it all, and it sucks and you fail. You had a plan, you followed, you removed the emotional aspects, you get to learn from that. You can go back and find. And so I think to your point, just start. Find an attorney who has a great baseline, but like our incident response plan went from a 26-page document, and now it's a few hundred pages of disparate policies and procedures, and they all have outcomes all the way down to, okay, Brad's our comms manager in this incident, but our general manager in Denver is the comm manager if it's in this incident, right? And they have different comm cards to prepare. Okay, here's our communications lines. You ever watch the White House when they come up and go, here's what we know, and they say the same thing over and over again in a little bit different ways? It's because they have a comm card. They have a list of what they're allowed to say because we know what it'll do for us from a legal perspective with respect to Brad. We know what it'll do for us. And so I guess what I'm getting at is you can't be wrong having an incident response plan.
Agreed.
Right?
I mean, you can only, and if you are wrong, then what you have to have, and it should be part of the plan itself, is a post-mortem, right? After the incident is done, you need to go back, you need to say what worked, what didn't, and then revise the plan. Without a post-mortem, well, then that's not good, right? Then just having a plan, right? At some point, you have to learn from your mistakes. And it's okay to make mistakes as long as you learn from them.
Agreed.
So, I know there's probably a big statement to make, 3 minutes left in the show, but next 24 months from now, if MSPs in MSP land, no matter what maturity level you are, no matter when you started, or how long you've been in business, the security thing could make you or break you. I think we're here. Right before it could, it may. Nah, I think we're here, guys. I think it's now so big upstream, and it's been pretty much out there in the public domain. If you plan to be around and actually in business and profitable in 2024, 25, 26, the security stuff, you cannot sleep on it anymore. I think this is, I don't know, I use the Kobayashi Maru. This is the demarcation point. This is the wake up. I think now more than ever, these incidents are so close together now that you can't avoid them anymore.
Oh, we'll still ignore it. Pintos blew up for like 7 years. No, I agree. I mean, I think we're heading towards a point where there is no definition of MSP and MSSP, right? You can't define out that I'm not responsible for security. I just do the data. Horse shit. That's what data is the part that you're trying to secure. That's what the CIA triad is about. That's what we're dealing with here is data sensitivity, risk, and cost, right? And so I agree. I think that maybe it's not 2 years. I'd say the court of public opinion wins the next 2 years as that goes. But what do they make an opinion on? They don't know what this is. They don't understand what an RM is. They don't know the nuances of what failed. So I'm not as optimistic on the timeline, but I would say that if you're not already focused on security as an MSP, you've already failed. I think you're already behind the time, and you really need to jump on it and start thinking about at least the legal, operational, tactical aspects of incident response, what you're going to do so that it looks like a policy your clients understand and follow, right? So yeah, I agree with you, George.
Sounds like Brad, everybody that's had their MSA not rewritten recently, and doesn't have an incident response plan, and hasn't thought about what they need to adjust in order to handle the security stack that's now kind of required, right? Sounds like they need to pick up the phone and talk to somebody sooner rather than later.
From your mouth to their ears.
Yeah, I'll second that one. If you don't have a good attorney, you need one just to understand the boat and the river you're in.
If nothing other than you're going to now be offering this additional stack of products to try and do something right. And you need to include in your documentation that, hey, by the way, these are now new vendors. I'm not them. I'm not the SOC. I'm not the XDR tool. I'm not the whatever, right? And I think everybody needs to make sure they spell it out in plain English.
just to manage expectations. I mean, mismanaged expectations is what causes most litigation. It does. It's not an actual breach. Sometimes saying I'm sorry actually resolves the issue, but mismanaged expectations, hard to say I'm sorry from that. It's just, people are at loggerheads. It's the most vicious kind of fighting there is. And it doesn't need to happen. It just doesn't need to happen. So yeah, I would agree. They have to pick up the phone.
I appreciate everybody for jumping on. I know there's a lot of information being poured out there, and we're just one little piece of a very big puzzle, but I really appreciate you guys from checking in. I really appreciate you, Matt and Brad, for taking an hour out of your day. I know you guys are very busy given the current circumstances. Keep checking back. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 1 o'clock Eastern time. We'll keep putting this information out. It's a community play here, guys. We're not trying to sell you something. We're just trying to put some knowledge out there so you can decide what's best for you. Thanks, everyone, for watching. This session was recorded, mspinitiative.com, under sessions. You'll find all of the other good ones with Matt and Brad. Rewind and play those back as well. Thanks, everyone, and catch you on the next one.
Take care.
Cheers.